Good day everyone, my name is Tony Pomawungu. In this video I will demonstrate the refactoring and transformation of the GLMS system. I will be showing you how it's gone from a monolith ASP MVC application into a service orientated architecture using obviously the web API as well as Docker containerization. So yeah, initially the GLMS system was just a monolith MVC application. It was one project. It contained the controllers, views, models, as well as direct database access using EFC, Entity Framework Core. So this system, as you can see, it includes three main modules, which are clients, contracts, and service requests. However, all the business logic and database access, it was tightly coupled inside the MVC layer, which made scaling and maintenance difficult, of course. So yeah, the biggest issue that we had is that the MVC layer directly communicates with the database, meaning that the presentation layer and the data layer are not separated. This violates SOA principles and also limits scalability. So yeah, before we go through the source code, we're just gonna run through the demo of the API and see how it reads and writes data live to the front end. Then we'll be able to go through the source code that handles all of that. So the first thing that we're gonna do, we're just gonna create a contract for each of our clients. That's what we're going to attempt to do. So we're going to create the contract through the endpoint of the API, and then I'm going to show you how that then reflects on the front end. And then once we're done with that, we'll then attempt to create a service request. And what you'll notice, before I even discuss the service request, I just want you to note that as I create the contract, I'm going to make the ID 0. And what you'll notice is that it's going to autofill the ID and increment that when I execute. So even if I use an ID of 0, it will increment to the nearest ID number. Alright, so as you can see on the screen, my contracts have loaded up and they have an initial status of pending. So we are going to change one of the statuses to approve, and then I'll show you what happens when we create a service request for an approved contract compared to when we create a service request for a contract which is either pending or declined. And through that, you'll also see us delete a contract through the API endpoint and also just to retrieve them as well. Now let's move on to the source code. So in order to have the API work successfully and obviously align with service-oriented architecture, we have implemented the repository layer to abstract the database access. So the repositories that we have created, as I'll show you, handle all the database interactions, allowing the services to remain independent of the entity framework. In the repository files, we have implemented a generic repository pattern. This is going to abstract the database operations from the business logic layer, which helps us improve maintainability and testability as well. The controllers themselves will be handling the HTTP requests. The services will handle the business logic. And then, as I've mentioned, the repositories handle the access to our database. We reuse code within the API to return JSON data, and how we do this is through DTOs. We are using DTOs, which means direct transfer objects. We use them to decouple the database models from the API to ensure that sensitive data is not exposed, of course, and allowing flexible data transfer between layers so that only the required data is exposed through the AI. In using DTOs, we prove separation of concerns, we prove that there is no direct access to the EF model, and we also show that we are using a clean API design. So just to elaborate how the SQL dependencies have been removed from the MVC project, we had to remove all the executions, of course, that read and write to the old database. In program, we had to add the HTTP client to handle the HTTP calls, and then obviously through the API service, we then are able to access the classes to the calls.